as far as vulnerability goes, when you are a leader and as a person that's attempting to lead a family, your vulnerability is, for me, the vulnerability thing, it was actually the key for me to connect with other people. I was actually able to find common ground because vulnerability is something that we all have, unfortunately or fortunately. I guess you can look at it as a superpower, in that vulnerability allows you to actually resonate with the people that you work with, or that you lead, or that you care about, and hopefully those all kind of go together. If you are a leader, particularly in the Army. So yeah, it's difficult for me to define vulnerability.
Welcome to the Leading with Vulnerability podcast. I'm your host, Yuma Barnett, and I got me one of those. Well, you can look at the hair and you know what Ranger Battalion that this guy is from. Is Michael Scoutten. He's obviously a 275 guy because he's got the sick flow going on. Looks great. Spent most of his career in 275 with a short stop over in Great Britain, I believe, as the LNO over there. Back to 275, and I always ask my guests, you were a rifleman through a first sergeant. He said, well, actually, I wasn't a rifleman. So he got to skip a position there in the 75th and go through. But sometimes that's how it goes in the Army as a whole. Mike, super excited to have you on here today and get into the conversation. I'm going to pass it off to you to introduce yourself, and we'll get on with it.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Yuma. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be on the podcast. Thanks so much. As you already introduced, I'm Mike Scoutten. And the reason why I was never a rifleman is we didn't have the luxury of enough people to create riflemen. So I think I started as a grenadier, which was, during that time, an untabbed grenadier, PV4, because I had college. They were like, hey, here, you're also the grenadier. Here's the narc bag, and we're also going to shove the hoolie tool in the back of the thing. And and by the way, you're carrying a ladder, and you got the worst nods that we can muster. But other than that, that's the only reason why I wasn't a rifleman. 20 years in the military, just about to be finished. To quote Barney Folino, 20 years and 20 minutes is all you get.
That's right.
Just about to finish. I'm coming up on my final out date here very soon. So, yeah.
That's awesome. And as per SOP, very humble self-introductions from the guys in the community. They never share too much. So that's my job on this side, to pull the rest of the information out of you, which we're gonna get right into it. Question that everybody gets asked on Leading with Vulnerability podcast: what's Mike's definition of vulnerability?
Yeah, I knew this one was coming, and I've listened to a couple of episodes, and I was trying to come up with some wonderful, succinct way of putting it that would just be like, blow people's hair back. They would crack the knuckles and hit the comments about how wonderful it is and how I've redefined it for them. But vulnerability is, so when we are discussing vulnerability the way that we're discussing vulnerability on this podcast right now, to be vulnerable as a leader, to be vulnerable as a man, to be vulnerable as a husband or a father, or a ranger or a soldier, it doesn't matter. What that means is something very different than like, this business or this base or whatever you want to say is vulnerable. That's generally considered a bad thing for obvious reasons. But as far as vulnerability goes, when you are a leader and as a person that's attempting to lead a family, your vulnerability is, for me, the vulnerability thing, it was actually the key for me to connect with other people. I was actually able to find common ground because vulnerability is something that we all have, unfortunately or fortunately. I guess you can look at it as a superpower, in that vulnerability allows you to actually resonate with the people that you work with, or that you lead, or that you care about, and hopefully those all kind of go together. If you are a leader, particularly in the Army. So yeah, it's difficult for me to define vulnerability. In like a one sentence format.
Yeah.
Vulnerability is let's have the courage to be real with ourselves and with those around us, and to accept the fact that nobody is invincible.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think, and I'll wrap it up with this, that the fact that nobody is invincible is the very thing that makes us all so meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I agree with everything you said. And then that's why I asked this question and named this podcast this, because it really makes you think, right? When you get that, when I send you the questionnaire and you're like, damn, he's leading out with what's my definition of vulnerability. I had to look it up, I had to go to the old Google machine and be like, what is the definition of vulnerability? Like, what is it? And I think it can mean something different in a different phase of your life. Before you were a parent, after you're a parent, when you were a team leader to when you're a first sergeant. And that's why I like it. It's just, I don't think there's any wrong answers necessarily. It's very personal and what it can be to you. And I agree with everything that you said. So you said it before, you were one of those dirty college guys before you come in. You have like officers, and then you have enlisted that already have college degrees. Like that's like you put them in a pile over there because you're not sure if they're going to work out or not. But all joking aside, what was your path to the Army and to the 75th Ranger Regiment?
Yeah, so I don't want to date myself or reveal how old I am, but whatever. I was in college. I was down at the University of Tennessee, and I was far more interested in playing rugby and having a good time than I was anything else. And if you were to go back or to, for some reason, reach out to anybody that I was friends with on the rugby team or something along those lines, and you were to ask them like, hey, would Mike be a good fit, or Catfish, that was the nickname back in the day, would he be a good fit for the military? And without them knowing anything about it, they'd be like, no, man, he has a horrible problem with authority. And I was just, that's where I was, right? And just like everybody of our generation or of our age group, because I sort of despise the generational thing. Like, are you Gen X? Are you a millennial? Are you Gen Z? Like, oh, and these guys in this generation, they're all pansies, or they don't have any work ethic. And yet some of the hardest people I know are, like from that generation. So it's just like, okay, well, this just sounds like older generations just talking bad about younger people. So whatever. But if you're from that age group, 9/11 was profound. It was profound for everybody. I'd never seen anything like it, obviously, and let alone the people that were affected personally by it. But, on my, 9 a.m. Or sometime there on my second or third sophomore year, whatever it was, wake up in time to wipe the haze from my eyes from the bar the night before, to turn on the television to see that happening right in front of my eyes. And I was like, all right, I'm out of here. I'm dropping out right now, and I'm going to join the military. And I didn't I had no Marines, Navy, Army, whatever. But I was like, I don't care. I want to fight. That's what I want.
Yeah.
My father, I was angry. And my father was, I give him credit. He stopped me and he was like, hey, I know that you're upset. You want to go do this, but he's like, finish college and then join. And if you don't, it will be so hard for you to go back. It will just be so hard. This is the time to do it now and then pursue these other things. And I did that. He was obviously intending for me to be an officer and to go fishing, and I was not intending that at all. So he was, begrudgingly accepted the fact, always, asking along the way, like, oh, when you dropping the packet? When you dropping the packet? I'm like, oh yeah, when I'm done having fun.
Yeah.
You turn around and all of a sudden it's like, all right, well, that was fun. And then the Army's like, well, you're too old.
Yeah.
So we're not going to pay you to be an officer now. But yeah, so I finished college, joined the military. Oddly enough, and this is kind of something for a little bit of a more in-depth question. I had an idea of what a ranger was before. So I went to, just like anybody, I went to a recruiting office. It was in a strip mall somewhere in Knoxville where I went to college, and it's like I think the Marines were at lunch, or maybe they weren't there, or like the Navy was. I was like, Navy guy, but the Army guy was there, and the Army guy happened to be a Black Beret era Ranger, and he was just finishing out the last of his 20 years as a recruiter. Had come back home to be a recruiter, and he was like, after this, I'm retiring. And I knew what a ranger was. I have a couple of interesting stories. My grandfather on my mother's side, he's passed away, but he worked very closely with the Army Corps of Engineers and was heavily invested in Vietnam, and would project out and find suitable landing strips in Vietnam, in Laos. A lot of very interesting, I guess, from a standpoint of that adventure, very interesting path that he had when he was in the military. And he was there for the fall of Saigon. And he, you can see him in a Ken Burns documentary.
Yeah.
But he told a story one time, and he was, somewhere, who knows where, but somewhere that there was nobody else. It was him and a small security detachment while he was surveying a potential, dirt landing strip that could be created somewhere where we might be able to, gain a foothold. And out of the jungle, in his words, out of the jungle stepped the largest American soldier he had ever seen. And that was a, LRPS era Ranger. And so that resonated with me. And that's what I wanted to go do. I was like, okay, I want to go fight. And these dudes are the hardest of the hard. Like, that's what I'm going to go join, or at least try to join. Got the MEPS and have what is known as white coat hypertension, which means if I'm around a doctor or if I'm in a medical situation, I'm not very comfortable and just could not calm down. Now, I will also say that the contributing factor was probably my lifestyle, in college at that time. But yeah, so I ended up having, I demolished the ASVAB, and I was like, they were like, oh, what are you interested in? You want to be a, nuclear scientist, shoot space shuttles? What do you want to do, son? And I'm like, Ranger. They're like, sure? And I was like, yeah, that's what I want. Go to MEPS and immediately disqualify myself because I can't. They're like, oh, if you jump out of an airplane, you'll have a heart attack. Ended up having to get a waiver for the military. So I lost everything. No signing bonus, no guaranteed contract. They're like, okay, your needs of the Army, because we highly anticipate that you will keel over and die as soon as you do a road march or something along those lines. Like, your heart is not set up for this sort of work. So I did a 2-year, but that, again, that recruiter was like, hey man, you get in there and you show them that you can do it, and you'll pick up you'll get this contract. You'll pick it up at basic. And as all those crazy stories about recruiters going, that he wasn't entirely wrong. They showed up at the, basic training, and they were looking for 11 Charlies, to come to regiment. Yeah. I didn't want to be an 11 Charlie, but, whatever, doesn't really matter. Yeah, got into the military with just a 2-year contract plus, 4 months for basic training, one of those. Yeah. They were like, whatever. And then, did well enough, by the time that I reached my first unit, which was third and the third on Kelly Hill, baby. Wild times back then. Like within 2 months, no, not even 2 months. It was a little bit longer than that. I was like the team leader that I was assigned to. He went off to go to do SFAS, went off to go do selection. So they're like, hey, you've got college and you seem to be somewhat with it. Here's corporal stripes and you're a new team leader. And then, by the way, we're deploying for, 12 months, right to Iraq. yeah. And then when I got back from that, um, that it was sort of like, hey, I'm back. And they were like, do you want to re-enlist? I was like, I'm not going to stay in 3rd ID. I would like to continue to pursue other options. There's some great mentors that I've had along the way in the military that are sort of I'm not going to go so far as to say legends, and none of these people would ever accept the title of legend, but they are certainly individuals that have made a name for themselves in the regiment. So, Mark Messerschmidt, a 2-time winner of the Best Ranger competition, he was running the marksmanship unit on Benning at the time. So his company was responsible for sniper school as well as all of the Malone ranges and all this kind of stuff. And he pulled me over. He was like, hey, I don't want to see good guys get out of the military. And he brought me over to there. I started to work at sniper school. Worked at sniper school for, I want to say, almost 3 years. Maybe a little bit less. Maybe almost 2 years. Hard for me to remember. It's getting fuzzy. But Jared Van Alst, who is, if you want to talk about dudes that deserve the term legend, that's one of them. And he came over as the N2IC of sniper school and basically guided me and mentored me, so much so that, I had a little bit of a mix up with not the most mature behavior, but got in trouble while I was, in the social life of Fort Benning at the time, and basically was like, hey, you're going to get sent away from sniper school. You're going to go meet the Army, and they kept coming down on orders, and I kept like dodging them with all sorts of unique little ways. And then finally, Jared was like, hey, or VA was like, hey, man, you need to go someplace where you will be taken care of, where they care about you, etc. But you're going to have to earn it. And he hand walked me over to RIP, and basically walked in, knew the guys that were there, and was like, hey, this guy needs to fill the next class. So like, I sidestepped all of RIP hold and that just purgatory, and I traded on VA's name for RIP, and then after that it was up to me. But yeah, and then the rest is the rest is history that nobody seems to care about anymore. That's okay. But yeah, passed RIP and got sent to 275.
Yeah, that's cool, because I had no idea about that part of your story, right? I didn't know that was part of it. And then those names that you bring up, that's pretty wild. That's pretty wild that they were part of your journey into the 75th. So what year was it when you went to RIP?
Gosh, 08.
Okay.
Yeah, 08 in RIP, and it, like, just as everybody who's been in the military, particularly in regiment, can just cough up some of the most bizarre stories. But I went through RIP, not RASP, or not RASP 1, and same with you. You know what it was, and I'm not gonna be one of these old timers who's gonna debate whether RIP was better or whatever. I can tell you this: like, there was a lot of suffering in RIP that had no rhyme or reason.
Right. Yeah.
And that, like, my RIP class was no exception. And it was interesting. There was 3 guys, counting I was one of them. There was 3 guys that had been in, that were not just on the pipeline from like basic training and airborne school. She did airborne before RIP at that time. And man, like, there was 3 guys that were, like corporals or like specialists. There was one guy who was an E5, but he was still in RIP. He had a tab. Like, I mean, this guy was like, oh yeah, thank gosh you're here, my friend. He washes out the first night in Coal Range, and they're like, hey, you, and they're pointing at me. They're like, you have a CIB. I'm like, all right. And they're like, put this patrol base together. And it's me and this one other guy, and he and I ended up becoming really good friends. We both got sent to 275 after graduate RIP, and it's just me and this one other guy trying to organize a patrol base on the field in, at Cole Range, out in the field, not in the wood line. We're out in the field, but we're talking like at this point in time, we're the first night of Cole Range, so we're still fat. We haven't started culling just yet. So it's a patrol base of like 100 and 150 guys, and it's huge, but just out in the middle of this field. And then they just started destroying us. And then by the time we were done with Cole Range, it was like, less than half.
So when you get done, you finish RIP, you get assigned it to 275. With your conventional background, when you got to 275, did you notice there's a difference here between my conventional unit and this unit? Was it the difference in people, the difference in the speed of the organization? What was it that stuck out?
Yeah, that's, the speed of the organization was very different, vastly different. Like guys will grind themselves down to moon dust, as they say, with the pressure of the organization. Now, there are aspects of the conventional Army that are things that you don't have to deal with that are a pain, right? Like, I didn't go to the field when I was in 275 the way that I went to the field when I was in 3rd, because they just would, and I think I'm not going to disparage the conventional force because the conventional force is awesome. But they would sometimes just send you to the field for lack of a better idea, or it was like, hey, we're just going to the field. It's like, okay, well, this is an incredible opportunity for us to really get after some training while we're out here. Do you have anything planned? No, we're just going to the field.
It was kind of that. That's the way we've always done it mentality.
Right.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that at 275. Like, we went to the field, but it was, we were going to the field to accomplish this training. When the training is accomplished, we're punching back in and we're cleaning gear and we're done and we're out. Like, go have fun, work hard, play hard. And then, quality of people is, and I want to be very deliberate with my answer on this one. Mm-hmm. If you were to throw a rock at any of the battalions, and you hit this many people, you're going to hit this many good dudes. You might find one guy who is just what are you doing here? But for the most part, you're going to hit, like, man, these dudes are all rock stars. The conventional Army, there's a much higher percentage of like, whoa, what are you doing here? But there were guys that I worked for. My first squad leader, when I was in the conventional, when I first got to 3rd ID, he was amazing, and he would have excelled he would have excelled in regiment. He would have excelled anywhere. He did excel, and he was an incredible light fighter. Had grown up in 10th Mountain, and was just, our paths crossed in 3rd ID, in which he was a fish out of water, trying to run, a mechanized. A mechanized infantry squad or whatever. And then eventually they were like, okay, you are now a dismount squad leader. And then it was like, okay, now I'm back to what I understand. And we got after it. But he's a perfect example of that. It was just one of those things in which, your percentage of like hits and misses is much higher in the conventional force. There are amazing people in the conventional force.
Yep.
But for, consistency, it was like that at the 75th. Like, the rock stars are trying to get into this organization.
Yeah.
Just like any organization that has some kind of selection process.
Absolutely. I spent time in RTB as a Ranger School instructor, and I came across instructors up there that I was like, you would crush in the regiment. Like, you're better than most platoon sergeants I've seen, or at least you're in the top handful. And then but on the other side, I'm thankful they're out there in the conventional force as well, because they need and deserve that great leadership as well. And you're right. It's a concentration thing, and it shows that selection processes work if you do them right. And
right.
So your time in the 75th, what is when you look, I mean, you're at the end now, right? Now you're still fresh in it as you're starting now to reflect on your career, your 75th career, your Army career. What comes to mind?
Man, I'm thankful for my military career very much, and for all of it. And I don't want to tip my answer to some of the other questions that you had on the sort of worksheet of like, hey, these are the things we're going to discuss. But that cliche of, hey, this makes you into who you are, really is true. And there are both good and bad. Now let's let me answer that question with a little bit of nuance. My anxiety has been weaponized for lack of. I always say that. Like I am. If you were to ask that question of my wife, she'd be like, "Yeah, he's such a pain when it comes to like being somewhere on time or making sure we have everything and getting frustrated with lack of flexibility regarding things." That probably agitates her, and I don't know if that was always there.
Yeah.
And they just sort of honed that, or if that was put there because of all of the sort of emphasis on being perfect for those guys to your left and right, or at least attempting to be perfect for those guys to your left and right. But that's I guess I would say that what comes to mind is it is an amazing experience. I'm grateful for it. All of it, the good and the bad.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and that'll bring us to our first off-script question that I've got for you. So obviously, we've crossed paths a lot over our career. We never really sat down in a room and had a discussion like we're having now. But you have a great reputation. You could have gone on and done bigger and better things, as they say in the military. Which there's some truth to that. There's some not truth to bigger and better things. But what you said, I'm going to hang it up at 20. Right. Why? Like, what was a driving factor?
And I guess this is also I'll use this sort of segue or context to answer this, and this sort of speaks to that question about the difference between conventional and the regiment. On the E9 list that populated, and I don't want to wave my own flag, but I'll toot my horn. On the E9 list that populated, first look, 3 out of the top 10 sequence numbers, 3 of the top 10 came out of 275 on that list. And it like to include number one sequence number. I was like, that's a unicorn. I didn't know that existed. But number 1 and I think number 3 and then number 10 were out of 275 on that list. So that kind of speaks to that sort of the quality, the density of the quality of individual that's in that unit or in the regiment, for example. And that bigger and better thing, was like, hey, this is, as far as the military is concerned, when you hit E9, unless you are in, a sister organization of a higher tier or something along those lines, like your days of really fighting or doing that kind of fighting work, they can be over. And for all intents and purposes, like these are the salad years. You spin around in your chair and you throw your pencil at the ceiling and you're making great money. And occasionally you go out and you fire up the troops and you get on somebody for whatever it is that your particular peccadillo could be. Like walking on the grass. All right, I got that one. I'm gonna go light them up. And I'm not saying that all E9s are like that. Some of the best E9s that I've ever met are nothing like that. But what I'm saying is that you could do that. That could be your path until you decide to get out. You've got it, quote unquote, made at that point in time. And it was like, I could have gone that way, although that's not really my personality. But I'll put it this way, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. my daughter turns 14 this year, or well, in 2024. All that my family has known or understands about the military is I deploy a lot, but we don't ever have to go anywhere. Unless we so choose, like unless we're like, hey, I'd love to go do this UK LNO gig and we get to go move to Europe for 2 years and do that. That sounds good. But there's no such thing as like, hey, I'm on orders to Kansas. Hey, I'm on orders to Polk. Hey, I'm on orders, well, I'm referencing names that aren't even relevant anymore. Hey, I'm on orders to Texas. Hey, I'm on orders to, wherever. They don't understand that. They've never experienced that. But they have experienced the incredible sacrifice of me not being there for every single major life event that you can name off. Like, we all share that hardship, and my family has definitely shared that hardship. So now when it's like, okay, I'm at the end, you have to leave regiment at this point in time. You got to go out and do, like the pick of the litter stays and gets that ops sergeant major job and does just off-sea. The rest, hey, like you got to go out and do your time. You got to go down to the academy. You got to go, to your first station where you'll be frocked. You're not even getting the pay yet. The whole deal. But it was just at this point in time, it's too much to keep asking my family to sacrifice on behalf of my career. It's just too much.
Yep.
And that eventually became the weight that broke. And it was like, hey, 20 years, 20 minutes.
Yeah. I agree with everything you're saying. I think it's such it's so narrow, the window, right? I think we're in at time. If it had happened and my kids were 17 and 18 and about to graduate, I might have considered staying. But I got a 5-year-old at home, right?
Yeah.
And a 15-year-old. So I saw what I put the 15-year-old through, and I saw where that put him in a mental state, and I'm changing schools all the time. And I'm like, how do I not do that to the 5-year-old now, right? So and I saw a runway where I could get off and be proud of what I had done and accomplished, and feel like I served the organization, but I knew it was time to go to family. It's a hard thing to do. It's hard conversations with leaders. It's hard conversations with parents and kids and stuff. But it's hard to say I for the first time, in 20 years.
Yep.
And with that, so all the time in 20 years, 20 minutes. I like that. I'm gonna tagline that one. What was your most challenging day in the uniform?
Again, back to the questions that I knew were coming, and this is the way my mind works. I just chew on it and can't nail down. I would say there's 2 days. There's 2 days that come to mind, and both of them, this will probably resonate with you, and not because you share this experience, but you share the guilt that we tend to heap on ourselves. The sword cuts both ways as far as caring so much about what you do for a living and caring for, I'm going to do the best that I can because the guys to my left and right or the guys that work for me deserve my best. And that's kind of the mentality that is required. But that's also the mentality that leads to like, hey, my family is going to miss me. I'm going to miss this birthday, but I'm doing my best for these guys over here. Eventually you hit the point where it's like what you said, hey, it's time for my family to start getting my best, not this job. But yeah, 2 days and the guilt that comes with, and it's, my first deployment. And so this is sort of lends some credence to, me saying that the Army didn't put that anxiety there, that it was always there. Here's a perfect example. My first deployment, we were out on a, not routine, but a patrol through a rather rough part of Iraq that we were stationed around. And we were doing our, presence patrols kind of deal. And it was at night. And there was a curfew on, and this was early. This was 05, so this is, there's curfews and things are a little bit sketchier back in the day. Not to say that it wasn't dangerous later on. It's not a value judgment of when you joined the military. But end up taking some contact. It's not of any consequence, right? It's just probably punks or thugs or whatever, but it's not a coordinated, crazy attack. It's just like, hey, pop shots at the patrol. And we're all in, 4 Humvees and 2 Bradleys. Like, okay, take your pop shots. Like, I don't think you want us to turn and fire back, friend. But, whatever. And we ended up having some Kiowas and some Apaches, or maybe a flight of 2 and 2 in support that evening. Not that they were really going to do anything; they were just sort of doing some observation. And for unfortunately, one of the Kiowas got clipped and was shot out of the sky and crashed in a very dense area that sort of bordered either side of this river that this town was, or this village was in, or ran along. And so they were in the palm groves on either side of this river, and it was extremely difficult. It was night. We didn't have, knowing what I know about the military, like if I had my platoon, my company, my squad that I had when I was in regiment, and all of the tech that we carried, like I could have bumped channels to fires and been like, hey, whoever's in the sky, point it out, point where I'm going, and I could have got there immediately, right? It wasn't that way that night with the conventional force that I was with. And we walked in circles through the burning palm groves as the Apaches were firing, to try and keep whatever, the insurgents off of the crash site. And so we're battling that. We don't have the best tech. We're running up against insurgents in the palm groves, and we're trying to get to this crash site. And we did not get there until morning. And it was literally it was like, this sort of thing that we all sort of practiced and talked about, a no comms call for fire, right?
Right.
The thing that we always talk about, the mythological thing, like, okay, you rope them with your laser and then you point it at what you want and they'll take care of it. It was like, and this doesn't necessarily happen unless things have gone horribly sideways.
Correct.
And I knew how to do it, but I never once in my military career have I done a no comms call for fire. When it mattered or whatever. But it was like the inverse of that. Like literally, an Apache circled our element with their laser and then pointed it at the thing, and we just like, okay, we'll go to whatever he's doing. And that's how we ended up finding it.
Oh wow.
But by the time we got there, unfortunately, both of those pilots had expired, and I mean, and we were there that Kiowa got shot down in the evening, the night before, and we didn't get there until the morning. And you know how it is. Like we didn't, like now that we found it, it's like now we're at work here at the site. I still carry guilt regarding that. And I was a corporal team leader. So this is what I say when I bet you can identify this. Like why, under normal circumstances, if I were to tell that story to somebody else who's not from our world, they would be like, why in the world do you harbor guilt for that? You had no control over that. You had no effect on that. Even if somehow miraculously you are this superhuman that you hold yourself up to be, you're just a fire team leader, a corporal. Your radio doesn't call anybody. I don't even think I had an imbitter. I think I had just like a little internal team comm that, that's all I had. Like, but for whatever reason, I carry that with me. I carry that guilt. Like those pilots deserve better. They deserve better out of me.
Yeah.
And so I bet that guilt resonates with you. It resonates with a lot of other service members that will just heap that sort of stuff on them, whether it's warranted or not. And then, so that was a pretty rough one that I still deal with. And then, the other day that was a rough day. And this one is a little bit more along the lines of like, hey, this is guilt that probably, it's a little bit more. It makes more sense that I would heap this sort of guilt on myself. There was, without talking about things that I can't necessarily talk about too much, but certainly some of your listeners and you will know what I'm talking about. Regiment performed a service for another government agency and allowed them to be, attached, members of regiments to be attached to other government agencies for certain deployments, and that afforded different authorities for that other government agency. And but what that meant was the assets that showed up overhead, which is what the whole point of that program was, were kind of in the control of the regiment people that were on the ground. And for 275, that meant senior non-commissioned officers. We did not have officers participating in that program. And it was my authority as the ground force commander to call in a strike on what I thought was a enemy position that was in, imminent threat and imminent danger to the formation. And what it actually turned out to be was a sort of unmarked, kind of as best they could possibly muster, ANA OP. And I ended up calling for that. It was my initials on that, and it was my decision to strike that based off of the situation at the time, and then obviously the outcome and the fallout of that decision was like, hey, I am responsible for, certainly not I didn't strike an American position, but I struck what is supposed to be a friendly on the battlefield, and it cost an ANA soldier his life, and that was on me. So yeah, that was a pretty rough one that I still, like I said, those ones you still rattle around with and deal with, and probably will deal with forever.
Yeah, that's first. Thanks for sharing both of those. Right, and I've had people ask me before, like, why do you ask that question? It's kind of, and I say, I ask that. I want to get that. I don't. First of all, I tell them I don't ask it out of the blue. In advance I'm going to ask the question. And two, I say I ask it for the person who hasn't spoke up yet, or shared their guilt, or shared their hardship, or talk, because there's somebody out there listening to that is carrying that around, and by listening to you tell it, or one of the other guests tell about their hardest day, I'm praying that is their catalyst to get them to open up and be vulnerable and go get the help they need and hopefully find some closure. And as you know, it takes a while sometimes. And even if you can't find the closure, at least you're talking about it and it's out there and it helps you feel better. Thanks for sharing. But it's not all bad. It's not all. There's a reason we stuck around for 20 years plus.
Right.
There's some great times in uniform. And I always like to find out, the flip side, what was that best day, or a year from now when you're driving around, you're just gonna have a laugh about some moment that happened.
I've listened to some of the other guys that have come on your podcast and give this answer and what they say. I'm like, man, that's a good point, man. That's so right on. Burke had a great point. It's like watching someone that you have worked with and you have developed get promoted.
Yeah.
That's a great day. But to speak more to, and I don't know this, and this is kind of what I was talking about, the good and the bad of the military service. Man, there are days when you mentioned it, when you think about when I'm just going to be driving down the road and I'm going to be, hit with a memory and then just start laughing out loud about that kind of stuff. It's not a big day. It's always something like, hey man, like, God, there was static loads out on, just suffering. Oh, and it's a winter MLAT up in 275, and it's static load night, and it's just pouring rain, and like, oh my gosh, the C-17 shocks just can't get it together, and we're just suffering. But one of your friends, because you have so many, just like cuts a joke that just destroys, and you guys just laugh and you guys can't take it. Yep. Or the nonsense that occurs on some Idri that blows you out into another battalion's, CTC rotation. And I mean, there are days, I would say, if you could capture it, if you could bottle it, man, the index call.
Yeah, yeah.
Man, if you could bottle that, forget about it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I could bring it down to one day.
No.
I think it's far easier to identify the ones that had a negative effect. And I can zero in on those days. To zero in on the great days, man. Every time we signed out on block leave, that's a great day.
You're right.
Every time we, every time you hear index, that's a great day. Every time you hear trans is on the way, roger that.
Yeah. You're right. And it's great. That's pretty much, I mean, everybody's like the same thing. They can pinpoint one or two moments that were the most challenging, but when you try to put it all down into one, the totality of 20 years into a great day, it's almost impossible.
Right.
Because like every day, even in the worst, in a gunfight, even if you took casualty or something, there's something there that you laughed about or smiled about before or after that, made that moment okay. And
right.
And you're right. When Mike said that, watching others, and you're going to see it now that you're retired, is you're going to start seeing people become first sergeants and ops and battalion sergeant majors that you influenced and have a small piece in their story. And that
right.
it's awesome to find joy in other people's journey. So, we'll move on to the, kind of the post-military part of it first. And I got a big question here. We're going to put it down to the bottom. So you're in the transition process.
Yep.
Still fairly fresh. I mean, you're still in the Army for all intents and purposes, right?
Mm-hmm.
What have you learned so far that somebody needs to know about transition?
Man, and then that's a huge question. Okay,
really
so
is, yeah.
for then I guess I'll answer it two ways. The first way that I'll answer it is from the perspective of like, hey, what am I going to do professionally after I get out of the military? And then the other perspective would be like, hey, how do I make sure that I'm mentally, emotionally okay when I get out of the military? Because they're almost two different things. And if you mess one of them up, like it's, oh boy, like you're gonna affect the other. So as far as answering that, the biggest thing that I've learned in the transition process from a professional standpoint is, I have been very fortunate. You also have been very fortunate to take part in some programs that exist out there for guys transitioning out of the military that I cannot stress enough how important it was for me to take part in the Honor Foundation. Right. I didn't know anything about it. It was just based off of a read of the individual that I met who came up to kind of pitch a 2-day event. But, Halty, you had him on your podcast. But it was based off of my interaction with him and meeting him at the, what is that, Forelli's Pizza in DuPont. Like we met after work, and I brought a bunch of guys that were in the transition process, or tried to get as many guys that were in the transition process from 275 to show up and meet Halty and sort of get a read on like this is what the Honor Foundation offers. But through that program, I learned, a lot of skills that are required to be successful transitioning out of the military and to be successful managing your career in the private sector. If it is, I love the military from the standpoint of like, all you have to do is just make it into the military and the military will take care of your career.
Right.
And that's what the military does. Now, that's not to say that you can't even, have a positive effect on your career or take charge of your career in the military, but you can literally do nothing as far as professional development or taking the onus upon yourself to develop professionally. And the military will move you along through the process and make sure that you continue to progress until you either have reached your full potential, or you do something that indicates you're not suited for further and further growth within the military. The military does that and takes care of it for you. That doesn't exist in the private sector at all. Period. Even if you work for a great company, which I've got a job with a great company that has takes care of its employees and asks of the employees where do you see yourself, where do you want to go, so on and so forth. Let's put you on a path towards what you want to do, and et cetera, et cetera. That doesn't exist in every company. But even at that company that I have a job with now, you could just sit and do one job for 20 years if you don't show initiative or desire or whatever. And I'm not trying to put a value judgment on any of that. It's not somebody who does that. That's great if that's what makes you happy. And somebody who tries to achieve something more, that's great if that's what makes you happy. Both of them are great. That's great. But if you think that you are just going to be able to get out of the military and go to a job interview not prepared, not able to speak about yourself, without a resume that, you wouldn't get the job interview without a resume that makes sense, and just show up and be like, well, I did 10 years in the Army, and that was all spent in special operations, and we're super high speed, and I'm the guy. If you think that's going to do it, that ain't going to do it. You're not going to get what you want, and it's just not going to be the case. You have to, I guess that's the biggest thing from a professional standpoint. The most important thing about transition, you have to take charge of this. You have to get involved. You have to do what it takes to market yourself, which is almost a dirty word, particularly when you're talking about guys from our community. It's hard for us to speak about ourselves. We don't like to talk about ourselves. Oh yeah, I was in the regiment, but it was the guys. The guys are great. Yeah. And that's true. Don't get me wrong. But you need to learn how to speak about yourself and market yourself if you want to be successful. And then the second part of that question, or the second perspective of that question, is I still reach out to guys, or guys reach out to me, and I'm going through it. If your mind or the emotions or the moral injury and all this stuff that has occurred that you've accumulated, for however long you've been in the military, it doesn't matter. You could do 20 years, you could do 4 years, it doesn't matter. You are accumulating things that you need to reconcile.
Yeah.
And it's not, again, here I go. The keyboard warriors are cracking their knuckles, and here they go. I'm going to tell you you're wrong. It's not, the answer is not, it's not at the bottom of a bottle. It's not at the bottom of a bunch of pills. It's not the only thing that I'm going to do is buy a Harley. It's not that. There's more. There's more that you have to do to, fix. And fix is kind of the wrong word. I don't want to say that. There's more that you have to do to accept what has occurred.
Yep.
And to reconcile what has occurred, and to forgive what has occurred, and to move on from what has occurred. Not that you're going to do the disservice and forget about it, or it doesn't matter anymore. No. I move forward with these things that still resonate and haunt me to this day, with the experience of having had that happen, so that hopefully I can connect to others and help them along the way. Yeah. And we can all do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you don't take care of both of those, your transition will not go the way you want it to go. Your time out of the Army will not go the way you want it
to go. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's what we preach it all the time as leaders when we have somebody getting out. You got to what's your plan? You got to have a plan.
Right.
And that's great to say. It's another thing to do.
Right.
But the caveat is there's things like the Honor Foundation, Special Operations Transition Foundation, the Commit Foundation. There are places out there you can go that can help you develop that plan. right?
Yep.
So you can do it on your own, but why would you if you don't have to? If you can go talk to the experts in that field
Right.
and get the executive coaches that you get, like with TAHF and the other places, just use the assets that are available. I mean, it's no different than in the military. If you have assets flying overhead that can tell you what's in front of you, but you never call and ask them what's in front of you, what's the freaking point of having the asset?
Right. Exactly.
And you used another program, which is the Hire Our Heroes Corporate Fellowship, right? Which is I know about it. Anybody can go online, find out about it, how to apply for it. But being stubborn people we are, sometimes we don't do it until somebody we know tells us their own story about it. So, what was that process like? Did you enjoy it? Would you
Oh
recommend it?
yeah. Oh yes. And I still speak to guys all the time. Like I'm still clearing out the locker and doing whatever, and I'll bump into guys and they're like, "Oh man, I heard you got a job," and so on and so forth. But yeah, the Hiring Our Heroes Corporate Fellowship is the program that I use, and this was post the Honor Foundation, so I will caveat it that way, because to do that Hiring Our Heroes Corporate Fellowship, you have to have a polished resume that will resonate with hiring managers. Or talent acquisition people that are participating in this program. But for those that don't know what it is or are interested in what it is, basically it is I think it's national. It's a national program that is run, and they are all of these companies that participate, and I think they run 3 cohorts a year, each sort of fiscal year. So I was in 2023-3 was the cohort that I was in, the end of this year. And on a certain day, whatever it may be, but a day of the month, all of those that have applied to the program and supplied their resume and done all of the steps that it takes to get into the program, your resumes are then released, like sort of shotgun blasted out to all these talent acquisition managers that work for all of the companies that are participating in the Hiring Our Heroes cohort. And there are, the list is long and distinguished as far as the companies that are participating.
Yeah.
And so for a period of time, you get, I want to say it was like 21 days, somewhere in there, it's like 3 weeks, that your resumes are out and the hiring managers are looking at them, and then they're like, hey, this guy looks pretty good, I'm going to contact them. And basically it was a lengthy interview process during those 3 weeks, where at the end of those 3 weeks, after you had exchanged emails, phone interviews, Zoom interviews, whatever it may be, the companies that are participating offer fellowships, and then you can make your decision based off of like, hey, I got this, like this company offered and this company offered, and I'm going to decline this one and accept this one. So I had a couple of offers, but I had already sort of decided on the one that I was going to pursue before that decision day.
Yeah.
And so after you make your decision, you then go to work Monday through Thursday for, gosh, how many weeks? 12 weeks, I think. 12 weeks is the actual cohort time. And I worked there. I worked at the company that I was a fellow at, as whatever capacity that they needed me to work, aligned against a job position that they are trying to fill at the end of the cohort. But the Army continues to pay me. The Army understands, like, okay, we're going to pay your wage and pay your salary, and you're going to go and work up here. And then at the end of it, hopefully you have a job, and then the Army gets benefit from the fact that that's another veteran who's not under the bridge or whatever the case.
Right.
That sort of trope. But it's true. It's like it helps with, so it was an incredible program that I'm very thankful for. And I have a job when I get out of the military. I'll start it during term leave. And that's it. And even if you don't end up with a paid position, like for whatever reason, the economy's tough, or they downsize a department after they've already had you as a fellow, whatever, there's all sorts of things that can happen. That's another thing that's sort of the negative about the private sector. But for the purpose of this discussion, you don't get offered that paid position. You now have 12 weeks worth of real work experience that you can put at the top of your resume that you are now continuing to shop around and network with. And it directly translates private sector to private sector. It's not you trying to use Chat GPT to sort out, okay, what does a first sergeant do in private sector terms? Like, okay, it's not that. You can literally say, hey, I was an account manager for this company. And I did it for this, and I was responsible for, pricing and, deliverable, whatever, you know what I'm saying. Now you have that real world work experience that you put at the top of your resume. So now they can see like, oh, okay, like you actually are successful in a corporate environment and you have all of this experience from the military. Like, okay, now we understand and I get it. And so I speak very highly of the Hiring Our Heroes process. And then another way of looking at it is I could not possibly network myself to all of the companies that my resume went out to.
Right.
As easily or as efficiently as that program did it for me. I couldn't do it myself. So it's just you cast a wide net.
Yeah. I mean, the so what of all it is there are a lot of programs out there for transitioning service members to leverage. And even if you're not a transition, there's programs for just regular college graduates, but go find them and leverage them and use them to the best of your advantage to create success in your life, hopefully. All right, Mike, I got 15 minutes before I get the kids off the bus. So we're going to cover this fast because if I don't get the kids off the bus and get on piano, I'm going to have to sleep outside tonight. So
fair enough.
But it's a good discussion question. Is the military right now has gone through some changes, I would say. We've come out of Afghanistan, Iraq, a lot of changes in policy and the way things are done. I have a 15-year-old kid that's right there on the cusp of trying to figure out what he's going to do in life. Military was kind of a family affair for me. My brother was in, my grandfather was in. I find myself not pushing military service on him as a primary. If he decides to come to me later and say, I'm going to join the Air Force or the Army, I will support him, but I'm not going to push it on him or recommend it to him like I would have maybe 10 years ago. What do you think?
So I thought about this question also, and I'll try to boil it down to the marrow as best as I possibly can. Asking about whether or not I would recommend or would I allow my children serve, as though we have a choice, right?
Right.
I'm not going to let you serve. Like, okay, well, they can serve if they want, but it's almost the same thing as asking, like, hey, if you could go back in time and talk to yourself and tell me, like, if I could go back in time and tell myself, like, hey, young Mike Scoutten, if you'll stop trying to do that beer bong or whatever you're doing right now, if you'll pay attention to me for a moment, you're going to join the military and you're going to do this, and all of these bad things are going to happen to you. And you're going to get hurt physically, and you're going to get hurt mentally, and you're going to get hurt emotionally. But all of these amazing things are going to happen to you. You're going to make some of the best friends you'll ever have for the rest of your life. You're going to see some things that you otherwise would never, ever have a chance to see. You're going to be a part of history, etc. Would you still join?
Right.
For me, knowing the bad, I would still join. So would I let or would I endorse my sons or my daughter to join the military? Yes, I would. But I wouldn't let them join the military with these sort of rose-colored romantic idea of what it is that they're going to be doing. We're gonna join the military. That's great. I'm proud of you. You have made me proud. But you are going to understand what this really means.
Right.
Not like this glorious thing, this ideal that you think that you're going to go be a part of, and then when it never lives up to that, and in fact it is not that at all. It's something far more complex, and some of it is is really ugly, and some of it is very tough to deal with, and you now feel betrayed. No, we're not gonna join the military with that sort of romantic idea of what you're doing. You're gonna have a real understanding of what it is that you're doing, and if you make the informed decision to serve, that's great. If you make the informed decision that you don't want to serve, that's great. But we're not going to set ourselves up for that inevitable letdown when you don't understand what it is that you're going to go and be a part of, and what it is that you're going to go and potentially be doing.
Right.
And I say that, and I don't want, again, they're cracking their knuckles. I don't want people to think that I'm like, I don't believe in what I did. I don't believe in what no. That's not this discussion, because you can look at my file and I'll tell you all of the reasons why.
Yeah, you're right. And we could talk about this forever and look at it from different points of view. And I have many of the same feelings that you have. And we are going to ask that hypothetical last question that I ask everybody is, if you could go back and give specialists Scoutten a piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, man. I would say, hey, this is going to hurt. And then I would say, hey, this is also going to be amazing, and this is going to be wonderful and beautiful and tragic and such an experience that it will define you. And actually, here's something that is a benefit of military service for me, at least for me. I actually, contrary to what haters may say, I actually developed empathy because of my service in the military. I actually identify with more people,
right?
Not just other service members. I can identify with a father in, Gaza, as well as a father right across the street. I identify. I know what's going on. I know how you feel, and I know the fears that you got going on. And that's not to trivialize, and that's not to try and say that I understand all this kind of stuff, but that empathy is there because of my military service, not in spite of it.
Right.
And so I think going back and helping specialists Scoutten understand, like, hey man, like, this one's going to be tough, but you're going to be better on the other side. Maybe don't, be so hard on yourself.
Right.
And that might actually be a little bit better for you. But yeah, I think that's the best that I could do as far as that. Go back in time, be like, hey man, do the best you can.
Yeah.
And everything's gonna work out.
I love it. First of all, appreciate you coming on here, sharing your stories. It's awesome. I know it's going to resonate with a lot of people. 2, we're going to do this again in about a year, and we're going to check in and we're going to see where the transition is and how you feel back on some of this stuff removed from the uniform, because I think some of your perspective will change, and I definitely know you're going to learn some things in the next year that are going to be value added for somebody that's in your shoes at the current moment that you're in right now. So appreciate it. If you're out there, you're watching, like, share, subscribe, do all the stuff I need you to do, support it. And thanks again, Mike. It was awesome. And we'll catch everybody else on the next episode out here.
Right on. Thanks, Yuma.